They told Lieutenant Carson the thing in the crate would save his life. They did not tell him it would make him feel like a complete idiot while doing it. Crouched by the wreck of his F-86 Sabre in the Korean brush, enemy voices echoing up the ridge, while he unfolded what looked like a child's pool toy. The bad news was that there were 60 miles of hostile territory between him and safety. No radio, no backup. He had maybe 5 minutes before the commies got him. The good news, in front of him were 20 pounds of rubber, a lawnmower engine, and the worst idea the U.S. Army had ever had. Carson looked at the sky, then at the bicycle pump in his hand. Hopefully, the darn thing did what it said in the manual. In 1931, American inventor Taylor McDaniel envisioned making flying safer by using air-filled rubber structures. McDaniel's inspiration was painfully personal. He had lost a close friend and fellow aviator in a post-World War I plane crash in the Brazilian jungle. Determined to prevent such tragedies, McDaniel set out to design an airplane that could survive crashes by bouncing rather than crumpling. After years of tinkering, he patented an inflatable rubber glider, essentially a lightweight airframe made of rubber tubes, which he believed could render crash landings far more survivable. McDaniel's first prototype, a rubber tube glider, made its maiden flight on January 4th, 1931. Piloted by his friend Joseph Brugling, the glider flew successfully in multiple towed flights on that single day. Buoyed by this initial success, McDaniel arranged a high-profile press demonstration 1 week later, on January 11th, at Hoover Field near Washington, D.C. Reporters, photographers, and newsreel cameras gathered to watch the elastic glider take to the skies. Brugling was again at the controls as a car towed the inflatable craft into the air. The first flight that day reached about 100 feet in altitude before the pilot encountered control problems, though he managed to land safely. Eager for better photos, the press urged a second flight. McDaniel hesitantly agreed, and this time the glider only climbed to around 80 feet before disaster struck. The inflatable wing dipped and hit the ground, sending the glider nose first into the earth. Spectators gasped, but then marveled as the rubber plane literally bounced back into shape. The right wing had collapsed on impact and then sprung back to form, and astonishingly, the aircraft showed almost no damage beyond a broken support wire, worth about 50 cents. Pilot Brugling emerged virtually uninjured, just a bruised heel and a twisted knee. The press was amazed. The quote, bouncing rubber glider had proven that an inflatable aircraft could withstand a crash that would have destroyed a conventional plane, potentially saving lives. Emboldened, McDaniel built a second prototype glider, this time with a bird-like shape to improve stability. Yet fate was unkind to McDaniel's dream. By 1932, the Great Depression dried up funding and interest in his inflatable plane. McDaniel never secured further backing, and he passed away in 1952 at age 61, still convinced that inflatable aircraft were the key to a safer aviation future. Even as McDaniel struggled, his intriguing idea caught the attention of others around the globe. During the interwar and post-war years, engineers in several countries experimented with inflatable aircraft designs, trying to overcome the same problems of safety and portability. In the 1930s, Soviet engineers, led by P.I. Grachowski, devised a plan to use inflatable gliders to deliver supplies to remote regions of Siberia. They built and successfully flew a glider made of rubberized canvas, intended to be towed in multiples behind a single large plane. At the destination, the tow plane would release the rubber gliders to glide down with cargo, and the empty gliders could be deflated and packed into surprisingly small cases. One report noted the deflated glider could fit in a 39 by 39 by 19.5-inch suitcase and weighed only about 170 pounds when packed. Early trial flights in the USSR were promising enough that an improved model was planned. However, details of the Soviet inflatable glider program are scarce. It appears the project never progressed much beyond the initial stage and is absent from published Soviet aviation history. In the early 1950s, the British also flirted with inflatable aircraft technology for military use. ML Aviation developed an unusually small airplane known as the ML Light Aircraft Mark I, flight tested around 1955 at Farnborough. Unlike McDaniel's pure rubber tube design, the British approach used a giant inflatable wing made of high-grade rubberized fabric, similar to life raft material, attached to a tiny wooden fuselage pod. The wing spanned a hefty 40 feet, but contained no internal spars. Air pressure alone gave it shape and rigidity. This two-seat recon plane had a 60-horsepower rear-mounted engine, tricycle landing gear, and controls on handlebars that were reportedly as simple as a motorcycle's. Remarkably, British test pilots found the inflatable wing aircraft handled well in flight. Despite its promise for reconnaissance, rescue missions, or even launching from a submarine deck, the UK project remained experimental and was shelved after a few tests. Essentially, these were, quote, airplane-shaped balloons, lacking the stiffness of a standard airframe. They flexed and wobbled in flight, limiting speed and control. By the 1950s, most nations had abandoned the notion of inflatable aircraft as a dead end. It would take a revolution in materials science and a pressing military need to revive the idea. Inflatable aviation got its second wind from an unlikely champion, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. In the mid-1950s, Goodyear's aerospace division, known for airships and rubber products, developed a remarkable new fabric called airmat. This material was a sandwich of rubber and cloth, layered and interlaced with thousands of fine nylon threads, resulting in an inflatable sheet with extraordinary strength-to-weight characteristics. When inflated, airmat became rigid and load-bearing. When deflated, it was light and flexible. In essence, it was the perfect skin for an inflatable airplane, far tougher and stiffer than plain rubber or canvas. Airmat even had the convenient property of absorbing and repelling water under pressure, enhancing its durability. Goodyear's engineers realized this new material could succeed where earlier inflatables failed. In 1956, at Goodyear's Wingfoot Lake Airship Base in Akron, Ohio, a small team set out to build a working inflatable airplane. In just 12 days, they produced the first prototype, designated GA-33. This pioneering inflataplane had an open cockpit and a simple tubular frame, but many structural elements, including the wings, tail surfaces, and pilot seat, were made of pressurized airmat fabric. The fuselage was built from rubberized airship cloth, with high-strength flexible patches where struts, landing gear, and the seat were attached. For propulsion, the GA-33 carried a modest 40-horsepower two-stroke engine mounted above the wing in a forward-pulling tractor configuration. Crucially, the design included an engine-driven air compressor to continuously circulate air and maintain pressure in the inflatable parts. In testing, Goodyear found that the airmat airframe could withstand being shot with .630 caliber bullets and still stay inflated and fly, an impressive degree of battle damage tolerance. The GA-33 inflataplane made its first flights in 1956 and proved the basic concept sound. Buoyed by success, Goodyear refined the design into the GA-447, an improved single-seat model funded in part by the U.S. Office of Naval Research. The GA-447 had a more aerodynamic wing and an enclosed cockpit, and Goodyear experimented with different landing gear setups on this model, including a tricycle gear, a single central wheel, and even hydro skis for water landings. Wind tunnel tests at Langley Field, Virginia, confirmed that the inflataplane's stability and controllability could be acceptable. With encouraging results, Goodyear went on to build a small fleet of 10 inflataplanes under U.S. Army and Navy sponsorship. This model was designated GA-468. It was the most advanced iteration of the inflataplane and the one intended for actual field deployment. Packed tightly, the entire aircraft could fit in a 44 cubic foot crate, small enough to be transported by jeep, truck, or plane, or even airdrop by parachutes. Once on the ground, a downed pilot could unpack it and wheel it like a wheelbarrow to a clear area. Using a hand pump or gas canister, the plane could be partially inflated in about 5 to 6 minutes until it held its shape. Then the engine would be hand-started, and an onboard compressor would complete the inflation to full pressure and keep the aircraft stiff. Once inflated, the GA-468 looked like a stubby little fabric airplane. It was just under 20 feet long, with a 22-foot wingspan. The craft weighed only about 250 pounds empty. It had a single seat and could carry about 240 pounds of pilot and gear. A small two-cylinder Nelson 40-horsepower engine, later uprated to 42 horsepower, powered a two-bladed propeller, pushing the inflatable plane to a top speed of 70 to 72 miles per hour. It wasn't fast, but it was comparable to a basic light aircraft, not unlike a Piper J3 Cub in performance. Fuel capacity was 20 U.S. gallons, giving a remarkable range of about 390 miles, or over 6 hours endurance, far enough for a downed pilot to reach friendly territory from deep behind enemy lines. Despite the flexible wings, the plane could climb at 550 feet per minute and even reach an altitude of up to 10,000 feet. Takeoff was achievable in a mere 250 feet on grass, and landing rollout was about 350 feet. Multi-terrain capability was another selling point. Goodyear devised a combination landing gear system with small wheels, floats, and skis so the GA468 could operate from land, water, or snow without reconfiguration. To the military brass in the late 1950s, these specifications were enticing. Goodyear's inflatable plane was compact, lightweight, and simple, yet it could potentially allow a standard pilot to rescue himself without any helicopter or commando raid. By the time the GA468 was flying, the U.S. was engaged in the Cold War and facing crises such as the 1956 Suez Crisis and rising tensions in Asia, situations in which innovative rescue solutions were of keen interest. The U.S. Army Transportation Corps took the lead on the inflatable evaluation, with the Navy's ONR also closely involved. The media caught wind of the project and dubbed the little craft with colorful nicknames: Flying Dumbo, Flying Mattress, Pocket Airplane, Flying Inner Tube, and Bag of Wind among them. Goodyear, however, officially named it the inflataplane and envisioned not just military uses, but possibly civilian recreational service as well. By 1957 to 58, Goodyear's inflataplane program was in full swing, and the U.S. Army began formal testing of the aircraft. The Army gave the inflataplane a military designation. The single-seat GA468 models were labeled XAO-3GI, or Experimental Aircraft Observation Type, Model 3, Goodyear Inflatable. Several of these were built. A total of 5 GA468 units were delivered for Army evaluation. Goodyear also constructed one two-seat variant at the Army's request, which it designated GA466. The GA466 two-seater was slightly different, about the same length, but with a 6-foot longer wingspan and strengthened structure. It used a more powerful 60-horsepower McCulloch 4318 four-cylinder engine to lift 2 people and could reach a top speed of 69 to 70 miles per hour. However, with 2 on board, its range was lower, roughly 230 to 275 miles, due to carrying only 18 gallons of fuel and the extra weight. The GA466 provided valuable data on a larger inflatable, but most of the trials focused on the single-seaters. Testing of the inflataplanes took place at Goodyear's base in Wingfoot Lake, Ohio, and at various military facilities. Goodyear's chief test pilot, Dick Ulm, was heavily involved in demonstrating the aircraft. On its very first public demo in 1956, flying the prototype, Ulm told reporters the inflataplane was, quote, the most unusual plane I ever flew. Pilots found that flying the inflataplane was indeed unique. The aircraft was extremely light and responded somewhat sluggishly due to the flexing of its inflatable wings. But within its low-speed envelope, it was controllable and could even perform gentle maneuvers. In one display, a test pilot reportedly flew hands-off to show how stable it was. In another, he cut the engine to demonstrate a soft inflatable parachute landing with minimal rollout. Goodyear spared no effort in refining the design and promoting its life-saving potential. They even developed a special parachute drop container, a padded crate that could be released from a cargo plane, float down by parachute, and deliver an inflatable plane to a downed pilot in the field. The idea was that a rescue inflataplane might be dispatched to a pilot within hours of a distress call. By 1958, newspapers ran enthusiastic pieces suggesting that inflatable aircraft might soon be standard rescue gear or even consumer items for weekend pilots. Reflecting the era's optimistic faith in technology, an article mused that one day, quote, regular Joes could beat traffic by carrying a plane in their car trunk, inflating it, and flying off. Even the CIA took an interest. In 1958, when an American CIA pilot named Alan Pope was shot down and held in Indonesia, the agency secretly worked with Goodyear on a scheme to airdrop an inflatable plane near his remote captivity site. Plans were drawn up for a version that could self-inflate using either chemical cartridges or the engine's pump, allowing Pope to take off from a clearing and escape. In the end, the CIA's inflatable rescue plane was never deployed. Practical issues intervened, and Pope was eventually freed by other means. Yet the existence of such a plan shows how much credibility the inflataplane concept had gained. By August 1959, Goodyear was so confident in the inflataplane's performance that it proposed an even more advanced model. It featured a more aerodynamic two-seat inflataplane with a 100-horsepower engine, an enclosed cockpit, and extra fuel tanks under the wings for extended range. Goodyear clearly envisioned the inflataplane graduating from experimental status to an operational military tool. At this stage, 12 inflataplanes had been built, and the Army was considering how to incorporate them into service. For all the excitement, the inflataplane program was not without skeptics. Some Air Force and Army officers questioned whether a downed pilot would really be able to use a tiny, slow rubber plane to flee enemy territory. After all, if the pilot's high-performance jet had been shot down, a slow 60-mile-per-hour inflataplane might be an easy target for ground fire or pursuit aircraft. Additionally, taking off from rough terrain under duress would be harrowing. These doubts began to loom larger as a series of accidents undermined the inflataplane's safety record in 1959. The first incident came in April 1959. Test pilot Dick Ulm was flying an inflataplane over Maryland's Patuxent River on a demonstration flight when, while maneuvering, one of the wings suddenly buckled and partially deflated, slumping down into the spinning propeller. The propeller chewed into the limp wing fabric, shredding it. Ulm instantly lost lift on that side, and the plane spiraled down, crashing into the river. Fortunately, the agile pilot managed to bail out and parachute to safety, suffering only minor injuries. Investigators found that a fabric seam had overstressed and given way, causing the wing failure. This non-fatal crash raised serious questions. If an inflataplane could tear itself apart in flight, how could it be trusted in critical rescue missions? A second accident, a few months later, would not be so harmless. On June 8, 1959, 26-year-old Army Lieutenant Malcolm "Pug" Wallace was conducting a training flight in an inflataplane over Wingfoot Lake in Ohio. Toward the end of the flight, Wallace began performing some aggressive maneuvers, sharper turns and dives than the test plan called for. In a diving turn from about 700 feet up, a critical control cable came loose. Specifically, the cable controlling the ailerons slipped off its pulley under one wing and jammed, locking the control surfaces. In an instant, Wallace found his control stick frozen. The inflataplane, still banked, began an uncontrolled descending turn. As the speed built, the inflated wing on the outside of the turn flexed upward beyond its limit. Just as in Ulm's incident, the wing material folded into the propeller arc. The propeller ravaged the wing, and with a loud pop, the plane's pressurized structure tore open. Air whooshed out, and the once taut wings went flapping like deflated balloons. The tiny aircraft plummeted toward the ground. Then the engine, now unsupported as the fuselage lost pressure, ripped forward off its mounts. An aluminum wingtip skid, attached to the thrashing wing, swung around and struck Wallace in the head. Wallace managed to eject from the wreck just as it fell into a marshy area by the lake, but tragically, he had no time or strength to deploy his parachute. Observers on the ground watched in horror as the young Army aviator fell to the earth. The inflataplane itself lay in ruins, a crumpled mass of rubber and fabric. This accident was a devastating blow. In the span of 2 months, the inflataplane had gone from hopeful prototype to a demonstrably deadly machine. Goodyear's engineers quickly identified the cable pulley issue and the chain reaction that led to structural failure. While they believed modifications could improve safety, for instance stronger wing material or anti-slip cable guards, the confidence of the top brass had been shattered. The Army and Navy immediately grounded the program pending investigation. In the wake of Wallace's demise, the U.S. military's enthusiasm for the inflataplane evaporated almost overnight. Helicopter technology had also been rapidly advancing by the end of the 1950s. Hefty, reliable helicopters like the Sikorsky H-19 and Bell H-13 had proven their worth in Korea for combat search and rescue, and newer models were getting better range and payload. By the early 1960s, it was clear that helicopters would be the primary means of rescuing downed airmen, not inflatable mini-planes. Goodyear made a pitch to continue development, arguing that the inflataplane's concept could be made safe and still had unique advantages. They pointed out the inflataplane could fly when helicopters couldn't, for instance in very high-altitude terrain or if stored in submarine pods for special operations. There was even a brief revival of interest from the CIA and special forces in the 1960s for one-man inflatable aircraft to insert or extract agents. However, these ideas remained speculative. The Army had already moved on. One general famously quipped that an infantryman with a rifle could, quote, shoot an inflataplane down with a well-aimed arrow. In late 1959, Goodyear quietly halted production and development of the inflataplane. The company even ceased manufacturing of the airmat material soon after. Officially, the Army's inflataplane program lingered in paperwork until about 1973, when it was definitively terminated and classified as an experimental dead end. In those intervening years, a few of the existing inflatable units were occasionally inflated for curiosity or as part of tech demonstrations, but no further flights were undertaken after 1962. Goodyear did try to salvage some positive PR from the endeavor. They often displayed an inflatable plane at trade shows, touting it as an example of the company's innovative spirit. Ultimately, Goodyear donated several of the surviving inflatable planes to museums so that this unusual chapter of aviation history could be remembered. Only a handful of inflatable planes survive today. Various sources say between 3 and 6, depending on the count. Confirmed survivors include one at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and one at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Another is on display at the Stonehenge Air Museum in Montana, and the original GA-33 prototype ended up in storage with the Ohio History Connection. In a fitting twist of fate, that GA-33 had been slated for the scrapyard until a Goodyear employee rescued it from a dumpster and handed it to an Ohio museum instead. The Goodyear inflatable plane remains one of aviation's most fascinating what-ifs. On one hand, it was a brilliant solution to a real problem, an aircraft that could be packed in a small box, survive crash impacts, shrug off bullet holes, and fly a pilot to safety. It embodied a seamless mix of technical ingenuity and creative vision, and for a time, it genuinely seemed poised to save lives. On the other hand, it was an aircraft trying to defy basic laws of physics, too slow and flimsy to be practical in warfare, and ultimately too dangerous to the very people it aimed to rescue.